Yes, welcome everyone to our second webinar within the Evolving Think Tank series focused on rethinking your funding models. I am happy to already here. Some might join as we make progress, but let's start for the sake of your time and the ones who were here timely. For those who are making it for the first time, I'm Vanesa Weyrauch. I'm the co-founder of Politics and a director of On Think Tank School, and I'm will be facilitating this webinar with my colleague Leandro Echt, who also is member of Politics and Ideas on Think Tank School. If you experience any sort of challenges in terms of audio, if it's just one, just let us know. And if it's many of us, it's many of you, will see what is happening. But it might be the case that your own bandwidths are not working that well. In that case, our recommendation is that you log off and you log in again. And also, if you cannot we are taping the whole session, so we will send the link and the whole webinar will be available after. So hopefully everyone can follow well, but just in case I wanted to ask well, your participation in chat because of this type of bandwidth challenges, giving voice and activating voice to each one usually takes some time, so we cannot have this type of dialogue yet. So we invite you to make comments and questions to chat. We will have special spaces for that, but as we move, we are two here with. So don't, and you want to make a question, just go ahead. Don't wait for that time. And we will ensure that we address your doubts, questions, or comments. So thank you very much. I hope many of you have had some time to go and digest what we shared in webinar 1. Our agenda today will be mostly focused on the change you desire within your funding models. And for this purpose, I will walk you through some of the main avenues that think tanks usually deploy and run when trying to make changes to enhance the healthiness and the coherence of their funding models. So we will go through these main avenues, and I will try to help you think about whether those avenues are worth exploring for you. I will share some main strategies within each avenue. I will share some examples from think tanks and also some main takeaways or lessons learned from this type of changes that you might want to have in mind when considering whether to walk that way or not. And then we will commit some special time to one of the avenues, which has to do with developing local resources. This is based on some of the questions and comments you made in webinar 1. So Leandro will be sharing with you some knowledge about government funding and local philanthropy. And okay, we will explore that together. And based on all these new ideas, some new, some not. Some of you have experience in some of you in others. But we will invite you to start thinking about what change is really feasible and attractive. This is really linked to the exercise. That is the way to wrap up the course. I talk by the end of the session. And also, we will wrap up with some considerations to bear in mind when thinking about sustainability, how this is an ongoing effort and what are the types of things a think tank needs to be thinking about and discussing every once in a while in terms of enhancing its sustainability. So that's the agenda. Webinar 2 will be, as I was mentioning, focused on ideas and practices that have to do with managing diverse funding models and making changes and innovating, and building on what we discussed in webinar 1, what you were able to read in the background note. We will ask you to develop a very practical exercise, which would be an opportunity for you to spot on those ideas, practices, or methods that seem attractive for you in terms of making some changes, and you will receive personal feedback from us after delivering that exercise, and we hope this will be a good start in terms of landing concepts and ideas into the reality of your think tanks and how to enhance your sustainability and the healthiness of your models today. As I had shared in webinar 1, the invitation throughout this short course is to rethink, right? To revisit, to review your funding models. We have discussed widely about what a funding model is and the implications of different types of funding models in terms of communications, policy influence, the type of research you do. Today, the rethinking will be focused on these 4 large avenues of change that I mentioned some minutes ago, which we name basically as restructuring, investing heavily in fundraising, developing income generation activities, or diversifying through local resources. We find that these are the main avenues that several think tanks, both in developed and developing countries, are pursuing when detecting weaknesses or several threats in their funding models, or wanting to tap into their strengths and opportunities to strengthen their sustainability. So the idea is to share some ideas about each of the avenues. My proposal as a start to each avenue is to share with you a couple of questions, and these questions are for you to answer internally or to think about. The degree of responses and the level of comfort, of easiness, or if you feel uncomfortable, if you really have questions that are answers to these that mean you should take action, maybe it's one avenue that you should consider more deeply and seriously. So questions around that would lead you to a decision to restructure are like, are you able to support your core programs and services? I mean, the funding you have now really aligned and reasonably aligned with the main goals of your programs or areas, and just enable you to provide the basic services you need to provide to people so that they can do their work well. Would you be able to overcome the first test? I don't know if you recall, we shared this tool developed by Enrique and Vanesa in the previous webinar. The test provides you with ways to assess how well you stand to face various challenges in terms of your funding model, such as the sudden loss of a key funder, or if very relevant senior staff suddenly leave the organization, for instance, to take part of a new government, or it's not only about losses, but also whether you have a new large support for a new area of work and you have to recruit a lot of new people. Are you really, do you feel that you have the resources and the mechanisms and the processes and resources to overcome any of these large changes within your context? Do you have a good ratio between the secure support, the support that you know you will have, and the work you want to do? This is similar to if you are able to support those 4 programs. It's more about the support you already know that you're going to be receiving, right? How much of that support is secured and is aligned with the objectives and desires of your staff and the overall organization. Do you have challenges linked to services or programs? Are main challenges linked to the capacity to have good communications, on good administration support, IT, or do you have main challenges to have programs that have a solid and strong and relevant policy research agenda? Do you have main challenges there where you think, okay, my structure, my funding doesn't follow that structure or the type of support my current structure needs? And in this sense, are you really savvy about your cost structure? Do you really know where your main strengths and weaknesses rely in terms of allocating resources, the ratio between the time you invest and the outputs in projects or Same with services. Do you know where the gaps are and the difficulties are? Do you have a sense of the seasonality of your findings? How do you have mechanisms to face some recurrent type of financial challenges in certain parts of the year or connected with some type of support? And finally, how do you invest in the institution? I will go more deeply into this topic, but are you really able to say you are currently building, making sure the institution remains not only because sometimes the goal is not grow, but it's the brand, people, its assets, etc. So basically, thinking about these questions, how do you feel about the way your organizations are currently dealing with this type of dilemmas, challenges, and questions, and whether you feel this is a reasonably large space for change, or at least reconsidering the way you're structured? Maybe you would like to explore the strategies that have to do with restructuring. Sometimes the decision in terms of the funding model is not to diversify or have new sources, but to rearrange things around and come up with a new model that is more sustainable and that responds better to the opportunities that the external context poses and the capacities that the organization has right now. So examples of strategies to restructure, sometimes based on the way you answer these questions, you might decide to create a new area. You might decide to eliminate a whole area or merge some areas. Sometimes two policy focus areas might have some focus, some common focuses and interests, and maybe you're not able to sustain both. For instance, if you're working in financial transparency and you're working in social policy, maybe you should merge those areas. It's very difficult to sustain both of them. And think about work with mainly emphasize financial challenges, especially when you have areas that are low performers in terms of funding, or because there's like a big change in the donor agenda, on the governmental agenda, and the decision to whether to keep an area is very important to make. And sometimes, even though it's very costly, the right investment of energy would be to kind of see how to um, eliminate this area or merge this area with another one, instead of trying to put a lot of effort in gathering resources that probably won't be aligned with a strategic agenda and won't enable this area to make a real impact. Sometimes sustaining just because that area has been working for 10 years is not a good decision. It's a difficult decision, and there are difficult decisions behind. But one has also to think about the transactional cost of not making these decisions on time. Another way of restructuring in terms of better aligning the resources available and the type of work you do has to do with revisiting your staffing arrangements in terms of having more flexibility, for instance, allowing senior researchers to take on additional projects, having more flexible time arrangements, part-time people with bringing projects and having a role for a certain period of time, or having more external experts working as a network to provide assistance in specific periods of projects or programs, or even the arrangement, providing them with higher ownership in terms of how to fund their work, redistributing roles and responsibilities and expectations in terms of how much of the resources that they need to do their work depend on their own efforts and how much support or resources come from the organization or from a fundraising team. So sometimes the best way to walk around challenge is to really think about how your agreements with staff are enabling or hindering opportunities to tap into new resources, to to make more flexible the type of commitments, financial commitments that you have with staff, etc. Sometimes this might imply making new agreements with more senior people who have more chances to kind of combine work in your think tank with other opportunities. Sometimes it's even combining your salaries for junior people with other type of very important incentives, like bridging them to study abroad or having visits to our think tank, or complementing their salaries with other ways of paying in some or rewarding their work. Another option in terms of restructuring has to do with strategic partnerships or alliances that would allow you to focus really on where you're best at. Sometimes some think tanks decide to kind of drop a line of work that usually give some traditional primary research on some topics. Decide that that primary research can be well done, even if it's not exactly the same research that they would like to do, but it's enough type of primary research that they can do, then to turn it to more like practical type of research, or to do technical assistance or advocacy on. So having a specific partnership with a university or even another research policy research center might be a good way to kind of focus your work where you're really good at, and partnering with others who can do the work that reasonably good work, that type of intervention. Sometimes it's like, okay, we're not going to be that good at advocating and influencing policy, but we have the partners who can really take on our research, and we're sure that they are the best to bridge this research we're producing to policymakers and help us craft more policy relevant agendas. So again, in terms of the lines of your work, we think of where you're best at and others are doing, and be honest in terms of maybe they could really kind of fill in this niche or gap and allow me to concentrate on other things that I do better, and where I can focus funding and people on those lines of work. Many of you probably have worked around bringing people more in ad honorem basis, pro bono basis. This can be volunteers or more type of operational work that for interns can be, for instance, bringing an intern to the communications department to really learn about how to do a good media clipping. It's a good win-win situation for the think tank and the student, the communication student, for example. But not only think about this type of work that could be delegated to junior people or people who are learning really from the very beginning, but sometimes it's engaging a board member or a visiting scholar or some sort of partner that can help us in some strategic tasks options where we don't find time to do them on our own. And this also is connected to redistributing roles and responsibilities. This can be either detecting those roles and responsibilities that are hard to fund right now. How can we maybe think about how different people within the organization can contribute or play a new role or have a new responsibility, but also not only limit that redistribution to the current and permanent staff, but think about other supporters who could bring on expertise, ideas, and free time to support us and help us. Of course, it's also challenging in terms of time management, and maybe at the beginning, we spend a lot of time kind of bringing on these people up to speed and to understand the way we work, but once that process is embedded and works well, it becomes better, and it's a good way to diminish pressure on getting funds to perform some of the functions that people might do on a voluntary basis. I see Pablo is writing there. You have a question on this, Pablo? Finally, cross subsidies. I don't know some of the organizations, but sometimes when you have an area like transparency that is really hard to fund, sources of funding, the work of that area, if strategic for the think tank, might be partially covered by overheads or by some extra money that areas in other parts of the think tank are making. Maybe some economic areas able to do some work, some studies for private businesses, and that leaves some room for some extra profit, and that can be used strategically. And of course, there's internal discussion that needs to take place to subsidize other areas which are more difficult, but still strategic for a think tank. Okay. Are the rest my so it worked a little bit bad. Is it better now? Should I continue? Okay. Okay. Great. So one thing important to think, as I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, in terms of restructuring, and to think whether you should consider some way of restructuring investing in your institution, right? There's a need, it's important that you are able to balance between a really ambitious approach where you want to have the best technical, the best assets, the best technology, a great office, very visible and solid brand. People are really paid and used to pay. So an overly conservative one where you're not trying to make changes in any of these just because you don't feel certain whether you are going to be able to maintain them or not. But it's important that your organization considers whether you need to bring the right level of investment in terms of your people, the people you have now, the assets you count with, if you're taking care reasonably taking care of your brand, and if your management processes and mechanisms, the way your organization is funded, you're paying attention to those processes and processes enough so as to sustain a healthy organization. So in institutional investment, it's very important in terms of restructuring. And if you're not able to really invest in a reasonable way in your institution, you might think about being more lean in some of the areas of the work you do to have this extra energy to conserve and to make growth sometimes any of these pillars. So an example of restructuring is the CGT model, the Center for Global Development. They used to work around large areas, and then they decided to do is like manage different projects under an area, but they focus on one or two initiatives over a relatively long period of time. So these initiatives allow them to organize and allocate the resources across the organizations. It's very flexible, so they can really allocate these resources to bring together people, support management, as these initiatives require or not, and as they grow or not. These are initiatives that are really big ideas that they want to pursue and that they commit for between them for a long time, but they don't need to have a developer project or people, because these people within the organization can support one or another initiative depending on what opportunities emerge. Is sound improving? Okay. Please let me know if it's not working. So main takeaways about restructuring have to do with resisting the growth inertia. When you think about restructuring, it's because you are able to think that you should not always grow, because pressures to grow are really very, very tremendous, right? There are always new ideas and smart people that you want to bring on, and sometimes all of these potential areas are really important, but the optimal size for a think tank really depends on having a good, well-defined mission and a business model. So you need to balance these two objectives of having a good mass of people with really able to cover in a very strategic way a nice breadth of issues, but at the same time to remain small enough as to keep being flexible, being able for people teams to work together and to continue investing in the organization on the whole. So raising flexibility and ownership is important. Bringing restructuring and thinking about structures are or affect people. So how people participate, especially leaders in organizations, take ownership in the way you can reorganize your work, and way funding is a good way to work around it. Share leadership again, it should not come as like a new model or a rule, but also think about how others can understand the implications of the size of the types of in terms of the costs and how you can assign, allocate or not resources to certain activities, and share leadership in deciding what is the best way forward. And finally, not of course, a sound recommendation is to not underinvest nor overinvest. So signs of overinvestment have to do with your yearly budget being usually exhausted before planned, that you have an overall tendency for expenses to grow, or that you have some functional areas that are consistently underfunded, but you keep them intact, regardless this consistently underfunding of them. And possible signs of underinvestment is when you feel that staff members usually lack support in significant areas like administration or project management, that the organization frequently fails to incorporate the kind of people you would like to have, or fails to attract the talent, so you have a high staff turnover. So watch out, think about whether you are investing or underinvesting or over-investing, and if you feel in either of those pathways or current structure. The second avenue has to do with investing heavily, I would say here, or digitally, but with a large with large attention and resources commitment in fundraising. Maybe your way forward has to do with taking the risk and rethinking your model. If your model is centralized and high or decentralized, you have a strong unit taking care. Everyone is in charge of fundraising. You have a mix of roles. Should this change? Should the way fundraising is organized within the organization change? Are roles and responsibilities clear and aligned with the capacities and the time of the people, or there's always a great abyss between what people are expected to do in terms of fundraising or what they can achieve? Do you have enough fundraising capacity? Or do you need a specific expertise or profile? Maybe it's just for a while, just for a time, just for an activity, but maybe you are thinking about something where you need to bring someone on who knows, for instance, the business field, or who really is an expert in organizing events and charging for that. What are the stages of the fundraising cycle that are most challenging for your organization? Maybe you need to rethink the way you organize fundraising, taking into account those stages of those periods, and reorganize how people are dealing and what people are accountable for in those specific times of the year or periods of the organization. Another question, two other questions related to whether you should invest more in fundraising have to do with whether you have a funding strategy, well thought of and discussed funding strategy and plan, or you're just reacting and responding every year to external opportunities and threats. Do you monitor and evaluate your fundraising reports? Should you spend some resources in having some more systematized evidence on what you're doing, how effective are these? And are there any crucial actors that are currently not involved in supporting fundraising? As I was mentioning before, this is linked with restructuring, and you should bring them on to support this function in some way. So if you have any strong responses that you feel like, oh yes, we really think that fundraising capacity is enough, or yes, it's our time to deploy a funding strategy, maybe your avenue to work right now is to invest heavily in fundraising, and from there work in terms of other avenues, right? And so usual strategies in fundraising are creating a fundraising unit. Sometimes the organizations decide that it's time to have a coordinator or a unit that's really focused on this. This is not, I mean, the perfect answer. It's not that any organization should do it, but for some organizations, at some because of the breadth and depth and the variety of areas and what they are doing, it makes sense to have a coordinating instance. No, Paula, I'm not recommending to have a special team. I think that's up to the to your fundraising challenges. But frequently, and I will talk with the example of this topic with I will compare decentralized and centralized type of models and the implications they have, and it really depends on the incentives and what type of fundraising function you want to have. If you want, and this has to do with the incentives of the people, how much do you want to decentralize that and have people accountable and benefit from whether they are able to gather funds or not, or you want to have some 2 or 3 strong areas that the organization wants to support, regardless how each of the fundraisers within those areas or the directors or the senior people perform. So maybe if you want to have a more I would say, like, if you want to have decisions at the organizational level where your think tank really wants to stick to some areas of work, maybe you have to have some instance there, or a coordinating instance where you can make sure that you make more generalized decisions. Other organizations are more flexible and they work more in constellations. So if a group does very well and wants to grow, and so you have a large education team but a small climate change one, that's fine. That depends on the philosophy of the organization and the model. If you want to work more through a network model and the incentives are like for each champion of the area to seek for funds and grow or not grow as they wish, you shouldn't think maybe about one fundraising unit. There are large think tanks like ODI who have a fundraising unit for each area. Some others have only one for everyone, and some don't have it. They coordinate this through the executive committee or some instance where the organization pays or takes attention and pays a general view into fundraising, but most of the fundraising relies on each area or unit. Others to actively engage the board. Boards in some cases have played a very strategic role. I think, Paulo, you will be able to talk about ACIES and Fundacies and the people who are supporting how they having some external experts in financial issues have paved the way towards creating a foundation for this. So think about your board and if there's any profile that can bridge you to some new type of support or can lead an innovation in an active way and take on some responsibility and leadership. You can also think about developing ad hoc committees for some time, like come build a committee of private business people who are interested about the think tank and who could think about ways to bring on private companies to support, or even individuals or people who are savvy, savvy people who can come up with a crowdfunding mechanism in a way that you wouldn't have to spend a lot of money. So you just have this committee to work this out and to try it as a pilot, and there's not a lot of investment nor risk for your organization. And of course, again, hire some external expertise for some strategic intervention. So we're not talking here about having a large investment in a stable unit, but think more flexible about, and this probably will be tied to the type of changes you want to make, but to think about how can you organize more creatively and more efficiently the way you are currently doing fundraising to either enable some restructuring or to either try out new avenues of support, as we will talk in some minutes, etc. And as I was saying before, an example of investing in fundraising is YEP in Peru. YEP right now has a combination of centralized and decentralized funding. In the 1980s and 90s, they were used to have a very large central fundraising unit that took care of gathering all the funds, and areas could really do their work. There was a lot of international cooperation, so the YEP was able to centrally gather a lot of support and ensure that all the areas and the services were provided in an effective way and aligned with the desires of the people. But as this type of support decreased, they realized that they needed to bring on redistribute roles and responsibilities, and they have a very interesting mechanism in which the seniors and the directors of the areas seek funding on their own, and they contribute with an overhead on a voluntary basis. They are not required to. They are not. The overhead is not mandatory, but there's such a good uh, ownership and commitment to the overall organization that all of them end up contributing with this overhead, because at the same time those centralized functions like communications and administration, etc., yep, has a fundraiser that takes care of that centralized functions and funding, or specifically funding the services, and the services are well funded, and there's a complementary contribution from the overhead of the areas, but they have this good combination of people taking care of seeking support for the work they do, and contributing both ways, from services to areas and from areas to services, to ensure that the work is done in a good way. Of course, here you need a good coordination mechanisms and a real spirit of teamwork and group where that enables these interactions to happen in a more fluent, with a good flow, I would say. But basically, the different fundraising models, the centralized one, where you have one person who um, takes care of most of the fundraising, compared to those models where fundraising is really distributed among many members of the team. It has different implications and costs. For instance, the centralized model is because you're paying salaries for people who are directly doing this, and but most of the administrative burden and all the, all the work that needs to be done while fulfilling grant proposals or visiting new donors is performed by them. So, while in the decentralized model, maybe the cost is lower, but there's a lot of more burden for researchers, and there are of developing grants, making presentations, attending meetings, etc. Right? This is a way to kind of consider advantages and disadvantages. Usually in the centralized model, coordination with the services is easier, with administration, communication, general units, because the fundraising is one unit, a general unit. So the way they work, the way they think, usually is more similar, and it's higher and easier to coordinate this, where with administration, communications, and other general units is more random in the decentralized model. Of course, this one has more flexibility, and incentives for researchers can be much higher when you have a decentralized model, where they take ownership and they see some direct effects between the effort they put in fundraising and the work they do, and how they are compensated for their work. So again, there are no clear-cut answers, nor a perfect model. This and a combination is also possible. The way you organize it implies different interactions and roles and weights between central units and which is called services and core programs. And this is something that each think tank needs to decide in terms of the spirit and the type of incentives you want to foster. So main takeaways in terms of fundraising is to be strategic, to really think what is the type of capacity you need and what are the roles and responsibilities, and make decisions in a strategic way and in a more flexible and innovative way, and not think that just because you create a fundraising unit, the problems will be solved. Right? Really carefully detect support and what type of capacity you need for that support, and if it makes sense to bring on a external expert for a while, if you need to really create a new area or bring on a coordinator, or if you want to change job positions and provide resources to become better at doing some specific type of fundraising. of course, engaging different internal, but also external stakeholders, right? I was talking about being creative of bringing other people. Yeah, but while doing this, of course, one has to really be aware of how the alignment between the needs and the research agenda and the policy research that areas want and the fundraising objectives. Sometimes when you have a very big fundraising unit or expert really with a direct incentive that they collect X amount of money, they will keep X percentage, they will try to probably raise funds or come up with projects that are not that clearly aligned with the priorities of the areas, and there are tensions there. So the organization needs to be aware of those tensions and think about how to manage them strategically. Sometimes there are some healthy tensions. It's good that people are wearing different hats and researchers are striving to do the research they want to do. Then you have the communications person trying to make that research more policy relevant and important in terms of communication, trying to come up with new funds and make sure that the salaries are paid. So there's a balance here that the organization needs to think about strategically, but the clearer roles and responsibilities are, and the more aware of our incentives and the consequences for those playing different roles, the better it will be in terms of finding the right way to organize your fundraising. So again, don't forget incentives. There are some specific schemes like funder fees, where people bring on projects and they are rewarded by that, or enabling them to do some consulting on the side. So try to balance with organizational coherence, right? The centralized models and being flexible and dynamic and being able to tap into opportunities very quickly without sometimes the needed organizational discussions can also be a risk. So each organization needs to find its spaces and its mechanisms to ensure that you don't become that rigid in terms of following a certain plan or just funding the type of work that was originally included in the annual work plan. So balancing, not being that rigid, because we know that contexts change and that our desires are not always we're going to fulfill them completely. So everyone needs to have a little flexibility, but not as flexible as to really become a chaotic organization where funding comes from any place for any sort of work, and the messages outside are not clear, and the organization increasingly loses its independence or its reputation, etc. The third avenue, I know I'm talking maybe too quick. Do you have any questions around that, or are you fine and can I continue? Okay, good. I take your silence as, as a good sign of we're going in the right direction. The third avenue is what we denominate income generation activities. These are services and activities that or products that you can develop that would enable the think tank to generate some additional incomes to try to bridge or to fulfill those gaps, because you're not able maybe to fund some specific services, communications, or you want to create an unit, or you want to fund an area that's usually underfunded because there's no real external opportunity, but you think it's key and strategic that the organization maintains that. So maybe think about some income generation activities. And questions related to this avenue are related to whether your area departments are sustainable right now, or there's one specific area department that's facing a very important challenge or a continuous challenge. Recover overhead. Are your services and all the type of investments at the institutional level that you need to make, are they really are you able to cover them, or would you need to complement the current overhead that comes from projects with other type of income? What are you really maybe we would be willing to pay for? I shared the other time this think tank in Croatia who is doing accounting and keeping services for other CSOs. They found out they had sometimes some think tanks have really good communications department, and their directors could provide some trainings on policy research communications, and people would be willing to pay for that. Okay, I'm sorry to hear that, Sarah. Can others, if this is Sarah or if it's me? Can you all hear me? Okay, Paula as well. So that's travel. Okay, I'm sorry to hear that. So maybe problem with my connection today. I'm sorry because we tried it twice and it was working well. Hope, let's see if it keeps being like this. I'll switch off to Leandro and I'll share thoughts about income generation activities through the forum. Okay? Okay. It's mostly working. Well, I hope that you can follow me. I'm sorry about that. So other questions related to income generation activities is for instance, if you're thinking about them, would you need some financial advice to carefully budget this type of activities? Which means that if you want to do or to innovate in terms of trying out some training on some service or product that can generate additional income for you, do you need financial advice? Do you need an expert to really budget these activities and kind of find out whether the costs implied in them are really worth the benefits that these activities could bring in the long term? Sometimes you need to make a heavy investment at the beginning and you won't have a lot of people maybe attending the first edition of the training, but this could go in the future. Having financial advice and having financial instruments to assess this type of activities is very important. Again, is there a market for you that maybe you have not detected? Have you become savvy at a specific aspect of a policy and you could begin providing technical advice or training to some mid-level policymakers to help them make their work better? Is there a market for you? Can you maybe forge new spaces where private businesses or civil society organizations interact with policymakers? Do you have stuff with business planning? Any income generation activity implies that people are quite enthusiastic and are willing to test new activities and also think about the financial incentives that yes. Leandro, is it working wrong again? Sorry.
Yes, it's
Okay.
hello. Let's see, Vanessa, if you can wrap up
Okay.
this third strategy.
Okay, great. So strategy or a for the income from that then goes to the think tank. Of course, many are thinking or would like to have an endowment, and that you then use that money as a sort of investment to have return, financial return, and that return goes to fund strategic area services within the think tank. Again, services that you are especially good at, potential strategies to think about income generation activities. And I'd like very briefly, let's try, we can hear Pablo well. I think that AFIES will set up this Fundafies in Guatemala as a foundation to make financial investment is a very, very nice and good example of how you can be creative and think about other ways of generating income. So Pablo, up to you. Let's see if we can hear Pablo. We are making a pilot here.
So let's see if Pablo can speak.
Hello. Yeah. Okay. Hi. Do you hear me?
Yes, Pablo, we can hear you, but there is a lot of noise out there.
Okay. I try to make it.
Okay, let's.
Well, así es. Yeah. It's important to let you know. Así is incorporated under Guatemalan laws as a civil association. Um, but around 5 years ago, the General Assembly of CACIES approved the creation of Fundacies, which is a foundation, a private foundation without profits, and it was created with the mandate to raise funds and invest with low risk to assure the financial sustainability of CACIES. Um, Fondacies was created by a donation from one of its associates. Um, the assembly agreed that the foundation resources are not distributed or transferred to ACS. Just the interest, dividends, credits, or capital gains obtained from the investment that the foundation do. Fundraising has been making through donations. We have received some shares, some company shares donated by associates, and also acquiring treasury bonds. The idea is to get a group of friends of ACS that invest in the foundation and to create a bigger fund that allows the investors and the foundation assure the same return that they get on individual investments with the additional additional percentage that they give to ACS to the foundation. So that's basically the way that it works. I don't know if I was clear enough.
Hi, thanks, Pablo. I think we get to understand generally how the foundation works. Let's see if later we ask you to share more information forum if it is of interest of the participants. So thank you very much. Let's see if we can continue with Vanesa's presentation.
Pablo, yes, you need to turn your audio off. Yes. Could you turn your audio off?
Great. Great.
Thank you. Yes. Sorry about that. Thank you, Pablo, very much for trying it. And we will share with others a synthesis of what you shared. Uh, well, now the last avenue is the one Leandro will explore deeply in the second part of the webinar, and it has to do with tapping into local resources. We know that many of you are facing the challenge of decreasing international cooperation and the scope for future grants to support the type of work we want to do is really diminishing. So maybe it's time for some of you to think about whether you should consider tapping into local resources. Is the political environment different right now, and does it affect the existing and prospective sources you currently have? Are governments now with larger budgets and with the need to use evidence and research, for instance? Do you think that there are new policymakers coming in with a need to have some technical assistance or without the time to produce the needed evidence that the think tank could do? Or for trying to tap into these local resources, it's also important to think how entrepreneurial your organization is. Do you have people with this profile that are willing to take risks and develop new sorts of activities and interact with new type of stakeholders and build from there new ways of ensuring support? Do you think that you could have startup? Leandro, could you switch your audio off, please? Sorry, we're hearing your background noise. Do you think you could develop a startup culture that helps you find new sources? Many of you have been around for a long time and maybe starting up something kind of a new muscle you need to develop. There are some people within your organization that are more key, that usually get more enthusiastic about new ideas and that really like to walk out of their comfort zone. So this entrepreneurship and startup culture and profiles are very important in terms of tapping local resources. Because startups or starting anything from scratch really requires some stamina in terms of patience, being able to overcome a lot of obstacles or lots of things that don't work at the beginning. But sticking with a big idea or a good idea about something that could work, there are certain people that can do this very well. And if you have someone there in your organization, maybe it could be wise to take a lean approach, a lean action. We'll talk about that with the exercise later on. But start small and pilot something new with those who think that are more ripe and eager to do this. Otherwise, the efforts might be too large and people get deceptions very easily at the beginning. We know that tapping or like breaking or creating a new market is not easy at all, and you need certain skills and ways and also time frames to do this. But Leandro will speak about that better right now. Let's stop in terms of what and before we really spend the second half of the webinar into government funding and domestic philanthropy and what is related to local resources. Are there any specific challenges within these 4 avenues that you were sharing ideas, practices, and examples? Are there any dilemmas or doubts or questions you have around them that you think I could provide you with some further clarifications or information? No? No one has any specific questions? I shared last webinar some of them, but some activities have to do with training. Training, I think, is a very an avenue with lots of potential for think tanks. And I'm not thinking some are doing more training that is, or thinking about, okay, I know how to do this, and I could teach other think tanks and CSOs or help other think tanks and CSOs do this better. But I also think about, for instance, REMIT in Chile has partnered with Flaxo, and they have a virtual training diploma related to their work, an excellent one, which they are doubling every time the amount of students that are taking that diploma, and this is generating a very attractive source of revenue that they weren't thinking about. So it's not only basic consultancy. I think that many of you are aware about consultancies and the risks that this implies, but training not only to CSOs and think tanks but policymakers is a good example. And I know that CADEP also has a public administration, a master in public administration that is working quite well as well. we mentioned Yep and Ida with editorials, like getting into the publishing market, especially as demand from governments in terms of resources and those that are working in education might be a good type of income generating activity to consider. Other questions? I think that all the world what Pablo was saying about fundaciones, and if you have among your board or within your circles of family and friends people that are financial savvy, I think that there's also scope to think about financial instruments to, of course, as you have a group that would be willing to make the first step, but thinking about financial investment mechanisms might also be an attractive source of funding for extra income for think tanks. So Carlos here is sharing that they face a big challenge between this centralized and decentralized management balance. Yes, I totally see that. I've seen that in many organizations, and I personally faced this challenge while being the fundraising director at CIPEC in Argentina. And I think that there are, it's very important in those cases where you are trying to balance those roles and responsibilities. I think that looking very clear into incentives, not only, I mean, I'm not speaking about incentives like whether if you are able to come with a project, if you get an extra payment for that. I'm also thinking about some hidden incentives that sometimes thinkers are not that aware of, that, for instance, is a way that all these new, when you have some general support or funds, or you have some you have some profit or from some type of activities, to be very candid, clear about how funds are allocated and how the open spaces for people to kind of in terms of how to invest institutionally. It's a good way also to think about why centralizing or decentralizing certain roles and responsibilities. So I think that incentives and being very creative and honest and having good conversations and discussions about who would be feel enthusiastic about doing this in a more centralized or decentralized way, which are the benefits, and having honest conversations and discussions within the organization is a way to kind of face this challenge. So Pablo here is saying that it's easy to think that some activities are extra work, and that, yeah. I think that's again, it has to do with the setting up of expectation and who and how the people within the organization think that the work they need to do will be done. Of course, that if you come and assess it's a wise organization in terms of having been doing this for a while right now, I think that this challenge is especially present in older think tanks like years, where there might have been periods where you were quite comfortable and it was very easy to detect and identify funding sources and gather support for the work you wanted to do. As this becomes increasingly difficult and people need to take on other types of work, or they need to do funding in with other type of stakeholders that they are not comfortable with, that takes, I mean, at the beginning, it's really a challenge. And I think there again to work in incentives and also to build ownership, to see and to try to, I remember that at CIPEC we really did an effort to make the whole budget more transparent and have more tough discussions to look at the general numbers and share the problems or the challenges. But sometimes the demands of people are really, they don't have evidence enough to kind of assess whether they're getting paid what they are getting paid or why they are being asked to do something that they don't want to do. So thinking about more collective instances of thinking about, okay, this is what is coming in, this is the type of funds that are not coming in, these are the main gaps and challenges, and having people brainstorm and get engaged and have some ownership, I think might help to see that this is not out of their normal activities, that to do their work, there's need to think about these issues. Sarah is asking of the think tanks, we know what portion would you say have fundraising versus decentralized approach? Oh, Sarah, that's a good question, and I really cannot tell you. I think that there's like a mix because on the top of my head, I wouldn't say that there's like a larger portion in one or the other. Uh, but the ones that I know well, but in general, my impression is that the decentralized approach is more general because many think tanks have challenges in terms of sustaining a fundraising team. And there's like a lot of risks implied there, and you need a really special organization who's willing to make this heavily investment from scratch. Yeah, I think that in general it's more decentralized, though the ones that I've been working with usually are increasingly thinking about some centralized functions. Yes, as Leandro was saying, the bigger ones or the ones that we are working with. Yes. Yes, that's why I was talking about investment, investing heavily in fundraising. The cost is usually large, and people don't see the benefits and the fruits of that really in the short term. So people get demoralized very easily. And also, I think that another thing is that when you're thinking about a fundraising team or person, you have to bring one that really understands the business really well in terms of what I think and the importance of keeping the healthy policy research agenda. I've seen cases where they bring on fundraisers who are very successful in other type of organizations, or they are very savvy about how to interact with these businesses, but their speech and the way they frame issues really make a clash with the way the people and researchers usually work. So I think it's very, it's not only thinking about the whether to have a team or not, but the profile. And also I think it's good to have pilots and start for small, maybe have a centralized new mechanism in a small way and build from there. Yes, Sarah is mentioning the case of the executive directions that take the lead on fundraising. If they have, yes, I've seen, usually in Central and Eastern Europe, some think tanks that I'm mentoring with, the executive director is also working in tandem with the directors of the area and sorting out where the role of the ED is more strategic or what needs to be done at the beginning by the EDs, but then increasingly taking or leaving those responsibilities and roles for senior people and junior people as well. So I've seen more, and I think it's more of working with the board and senior people. Pablo, in terms of the publications, I think that Leandro can tell more about IRE in Indonesia, but yet the publications are manuals that can be used at schools or training type of handbooks that can be used by policymakers implementing policies. So the government in that case would be the buyer, no, the client of those publications, because it's true that most of the publications that are research related are free, and it would be very difficult to have a market for that. What are the advantages of having a decentralized support of funding if you have the financial condition to have a decentralized one? Well, I think that this has to do with probably preparing yourself for if you cannot have that centralized one, but also making sure that there's a better buy-in and alignment between the funds and the agenda. Also, I think that the decentralized effort, when you have people, and I've seen like area directors that are really good at what they do, when going into more the local type of support, they are better conveyors and they are much better able to convince private businessmen or policymakers about how they can help them. and why their work is important. And they are also in the right spaces where people that are interested in the work they do are engaged, and it's easier for them to make that connection and to seek for governmental contracts or support from some private companies that are interested in there. So maybe the centralized one model, these people won't be like they are. They wouldn't be reaching to other spaces that people the other areas are. So with the decentralized approach, you have a wider reach and more scope to detect opportunities, or even to think about how to frame your work so that it's sellable to others. Okay. I see here that, yes, Leandro is telling about, yes, I think that this leads to the point of institutional investment that I was making, Sarah, and I think that's very important in terms of thinking about your structure. Do you really have, and you're really paying attention to the way you invest in institutions. So when I was talking about the organizational structure, it's about this department to have the capacity to communicate well, to administrate well your funds, to manage well your projects. So the decision and the commitment to invest in an institution probably comes from the leadership and the leadership conviction about the need to really carve a piece of the cake to make sure that this happens. So when these leaders think that the way forward is that you have a strong institution, a solid institution, they usually invest, and they usually would have a fundraising unit or coordinator that's looking at these things integrally and in interaction with the other departments. And that brings a lot of synergies as well. Okay, Leandro's here saying that it is, yes, the editorial business is quite difficult, but I think that thinking about governments, especially for those who could be producing products, that publications that could be used, like guidance, how-to, and handbooks for policymakers, I think that's a really potential avenue to explore. So yes, that being said, I think we are well prepared to get into the second session, second part of the session, and to really think about local resources and how to diversify and complement your current support with other new avenues. Thanks for all your questions. Very interesting, and we can follow with other that might arise in your head through the forum. So don't shy away from asking in the forum as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vanessa. Let me ask the group if can you hear me well? Great. So let me know if the audio goes off. Let's hope it will work better now. So great, Vanessa. Thanks, Vanessa, for this great introduction. The idea of this second half of the webinar is to deepen on the fourth strategy that Vanessa introduced, and it is about working with local resources. And the first issue I want to introduce is that there are some fears around diversifications. So many think tanks do not sometimes hesitate about local resources, local funding resources. So let's see what these fears are about. So sometimes organizations believe that if they work with local resources, it will mean an additional tax for the people with fundraising responsibilities, and for the executive director if there is not a specific responsible of fundraising. The idea is that it will create more workload. Another common fear is that there will not be other donors interested in supporting the organization's research. So they just want to keep things as they are working usually with international donors, and they do not want to innovate or explore other sources. This is based sometimes is the assumption that there are no viable donors locally, and of course that they might think that this new approach might require developing a new skill set. This is an important one because to some extent this is true. It means sometimes not skill set, but a different approach. We will see this in some minutes. Also, they might believe that the local sources could spread impact to things. So there is not the investment against the results is not so important. These are common fears, and at the same time, linked to these common fears, let me tap in one of the main local sources that we can recognize. So within the big idea of local resources, we will concentrate in two main sources. On the one side, the funding that comes from governments, different agencies in national governments. The second source we will tap into is what we can say private support, companies, individuals. So basically the idea of local resources refers to funds that come from within the country, right? Not from outside. This can be also discussed, as you might say, okay, some organizations, some companies are international but are based nationally, but the idea is that we are referring to organizations and the government, and of course private organizations and individuals that belong and have a sense of belonging to each country. So let's start with government funding. You might know that especially in developing countries, governments do not have strong policies toward funding social science research. They usually support hard sciences rather than social sciences, and they support universities in a more programmatic way. When it happens that the government support organizations such as think tanks, it usually takes place on a programmatic basis and through unsystematic grants or contracts. So think tanks might say, okay, this might not be an issue for think tanks. They might that it is healthy to not approach the government, because one main theories about independence. So let's see what are typical assumptions when approaching government that we are sharing this in the form of questions. So sometimes organizations might believe that the government, they can ask themselves, do they really care about policy research? Are there clear bidding rules? Should a think tank get into implementation? It is something that is increasingly demanded by governments. A very important assumption is to what extent a think tank can remain objective and independent if they engage with public agencies. And finally, the issue of what is the budget and the money they are willing to spend on research. So these are some assumptions that we invite you to questions along the presentation. So the idea is that a think tank that wants to explore working with governments should overcome these initial assumptions. Okay. So it is important when thinking about approaching governments to understand why public agencies will support research, but also policy advice and training. It is important to see a broader picture, not to concentrate just on research. Increasingly, governments, at least what we see in Latin America, is that governments demand support in other areas, not just research, but also policy advice and also capacity development. So, what are the reasons for they to demand support from think tanks? So, they are a few, and we are sharing them there. So the first one has to do with staff mix. So it happens oftenly that a ministry or an agency does not have all available staff that it would need to conduct a study that it needs. So also this study might vary over time. So it is even less likely that they will be able to address this variety of domains and disciplines. So this is a clear reason for them to outsource this type of services. That is the lack of specific or expert staff. Another reason has to do with the flexibility and timeliness that an external source provide. So you might know that there are certain research needs that are only periodic, like here we share the example of impact evaluation studies. There is not something that sometimes is systematic. So here it makes more sense to remain flexible and partner with external organizations like think tanks as they need it. This would be more convenient than creating a specific bureaucracy with the skills to cover all these research needs. The third reason that we found has to do with the long-term advice that think tanks can provide. The nature of the day-to-day business in the public administration makes difficult for civil servants to conduct long-term orientated analysis. So that is something that they usually seek when approaching outside organizations. Think tanks could help them improve or visualize long-term efforts and long-term impact of their work. Another reason has to do with that governments are usually interested in building evidence on what worked for other governments locally or internationally. So they are interested in understand what works for others in other contexts. And this is a criteria sometimes for making decisions. So it is important, and think tanks can contribute with this kind of analysis. Another reason is that they sometimes require external advice or facilitators that provide credibility to certain decision-making or participation process. So bringing in an external and sometimes we can say neutral part or body will help them increase this credibility about decision-making. one of the final reasons is that think tanks can also help public agency to showcase their outstanding work or efforts in certain areas, and they can support this task with concrete evidence. This is something also that is required by governments. And final reason is that sometimes governments are interested in outsourcing these services because it will help them to access multilateral or international bodies that sometimes require the creation of ad hoc governmental agencies, and these agencies could benefit from the support of external organizations that have more expertise in dealing with international cooperation than the civil servants in the public administration. So these are just some general reasons. Of course, you need to adapt them to your own context. Sometimes some of them will make more sense, but the idea is that it is important for us to consider what are the reasons of these agencies to work with organizations such as think tanks. I want to go through this very briefly. There are different types of different ways in which governments contract organizations, and we should understand which is the way in which it works in our country or for each specific policy area, to understand the best or the best entry point. So sometimes there are specific offices that centralizes the policy development and research and reports directly to the ministers. Sometimes the responsibility is shared between a program office and a procurement office, and sometimes this is fully handled by each program office. So depending on what type we are dealing with, we can understand different entry points, especially if we have personal links with these people in charge of allocating funds for research. So this is something very common sense. There are different advantages and disadvantages in working with public agencies. So from different talks with think tanks, we present this set of disadvantages and advantages, and let me go some of them. So the lack of independence is a very important one. The lack of agenda focus is also very important for in terms of the research purposes of the think tanks. Sometimes if you sometimes working with governments will make you go aside your agenda, your research objectives, and work on the demand requirements. You can face some restriction in the use of data and publications. Also, you might create inconvenience for other clients or sponsors or partners of the think tank. Financial restrictions is very common. You know that public administration is very bureaucratic, and sometimes you work with a high level of uncertainty. And also you can face a lot of management challenges, you know, to receive the funds, to allocate them, also to show accountability. This also should be considered. So advantages are also very clear. Working with governments will increase your relevance and visibility. It will give you a lot of first-hand experiences about policy and different policy issues. Of course, and this is something that is at the core of what we're talking about. It will help you diversify your funds. Also, at least in the countries we have experience, governments are more have more disposition to cover overhead functions. This is also important at the managerial level, and of course it gives you the possibility to show evidence of impact for other donors of the think tank. So when considering all these advantages and disadvantages and the different ways in which the government can outsource support, and also considering new government funding schemes, new trends as the ones we are sharing here, let me tap into this. So when thinking about government funding, we can also think not only about national level support, but also local governments that sometimes and increasingly in some countries are responsible for allocate funds from international donors and organizations. So local governments are also another entry point. And I was saying before that together with the more traditional support for the design of policies, some governments are starting to demand support for implementation of policies, and this put the think tanks in the scenario of being sort of brokers of processes and also capacity developers. So there are different opportunities and entry points there. Of course, some governments are outsourcing monitoring and evaluation of their work. And finally, there is another opportunity in parliaments that have the possibility to allocate funds directly to organization or other type of external advisors. So, sorry. So with all these context, considering your assumptions, considering how governments outsource support in your own context, the different trends at the international level, and advantages and disadvantages, we can come up with some concrete strategies to tackle government funding. On the one hand is to understand which are the agencies that have more possibilities to support units or available funds. These are typical spaces that the think tank can analyze and can approach to start working closer with governments. Sometimes it's not about working directly with the implementers or the policy makers. Sometimes it's about understanding what are their priorities in terms of research, or the national priorities in terms of research, and approach some calls from science and technology councils, as I was saying before. Another strategy is to keep track of former think tankers from your own organization and from other organizations that you might know that move to the state. This is very common for think tankers after a period of time to move to the public administration and try to work from the inside, we can say, and they are influencers or people that understand how the different process of the state to allocate funds and the different priorities, and can be a direct window to start working with governments. Another strategy is to create a position or unit within your organization to manage government contracts. You can have both a proactive and a reactive approach to the different opportunities. This is something that CPEC, a think tank in Argentina, created a couple of years ago, and with very good results, because in the understanding that governments and politicians and their teams need a different approach, different from other sources. But anyway, CPEC, we will see, is a think tank that has different responsibles for different type of funding sources. And a final strategy is to consider a higher overhead to mitigate some delays in payments and excessive administrative burden that usually are the consequences of working with governments, and also with governments at the different levels, national, subnational, and local. So these are some strategies that we recommend you to consider when trying to work with governments. It will be great to hear from you in some minutes about your experience in working with this type of funding source. Let me now enter into the second source that we will approach. We will concentrate in local philanthropy. And again, I would like to start with questioning some assumptions that are there when think tanks decide or analyze the convenience of working with local philanthropy. So some questions that are around are there wealthy enough people interested in public policy? Do they think policy research is valuable? Can we really handle these stakeholders' expectations? Could private companies be genuinely interested in the quality of public policies? Can they ever support the think tank in the way think tanks need it? Will they take more than what they give to us? So this is different assumptions. Sometimes they refer to the context, sometimes refer to the internal, the capacity of the think tank to deal with the organization. So it is important to understand these assumptions and try to question and to discuss them within the organization, because at the end of the day, tapping into local philanthropies or funding or government funding is about testing new ways of being funded. So it requires some type of willingness, and also to overcome some fears and assumptions. So once again, advantages and disadvantages of this type of source. As they are locals, they are better attuned with local needs and higher understanding of local circumstances. And this is very important in the context of withdrawal of international donors. Local philanthropists and local sources can guarantee long-term presence. This is a very important or very key incentive for tapping into these sources. They usually present more flexible accountability and reporting requirements. They can help you leverage support from similar individuals. Sometimes the CEOs of private companies become a sort of ambassadors of supporting your think tanks if they are happy with your work. And in terms of advantages, yes, I'm so sorry. Thank you, Vanessa, for noting that. Hope you will understand this. So I was talking about advantages. Now I will tap into disadvantages. So sometimes there is not a systematic approach like international cooperation has to work with organizations. sometimes the requirements vary and change from company or from individual to individual. They show some preference for direct interventions rather than research. They might be reluctant to work on some political sensitive issues. This is something that the think tank should consider also. And of course, the think tank might suffer some potential pressure to align the support with the philanthropy's interests, priorities, and interpretation of the issue in question. So this is something to consider when working with local philanthropists. And of course, before approaching local sources, you need to understand their incentives and understand the landscape in which these relations can be built. So one important point is that what happens with regulation, with tax regulations? Do they help? Are they an incentive for philanthropists to support our think tank? It really depends on. It is very contextual. It really depends on your country. The example is the main example is the United States, that they have these incentives, and that's one of the reasons that their culture of donating is more important than in other countries. Also, you should understand what are the main areas in which individuals and companies currently donate. It's you can carry a sort of market study and understand where the donors are more willing to put their money, and also what are their future priorities, the ones of the country and also the one of the different individuals. Understanding motivation is also important. There are motivations at the individual level and also at the company level. Let me concentrate in the companies, what I think is more important at this point. Companies support civil society organization because it helps them strengthen their institutional image, and also an important point is it gives them access to policymakers. So we should understand which are the way the different entry points that we can use to engage companies and individuals in supporting our research. It's not about just portraying our research work and how great we are doing research and the impact we might have, but also what can they receive from supporting our think tank. I'm sure very powerful donors and companies will be very interested in accessing policymakers in some, especially in the issues in which they work. We can then understand the different type of philanthropists that are in our country. One way that we found to categorize these different types of philanthropists is to understand whether they are based in the sector, meaning for-profit companies of different size and industries, or they are not within the private sector. And the other axis has to do with whether they provide financial assistance in a systematic way or not. By systematic, here we understand funding schemes that are subject to regulations and managed by specific responsibles and with specific mechanisms. So if we consider these different axes, we come up with four main categories. Corporate social responsibility programs, and then foundations. And at the individual level, we can approach CEOs of the different companies and also CEOs and owners. And at the civil society, from the civil society side, when we talk about individuals, we can refer to community philanthropists. This is a concept that we should understand a little bit more, and other interested individuals. They, of course, they do not need to be billionaires to be under this category. Let me go briefly through the difference with international cooperations and the implications it has in the think tank approach. So the communication strategy should typically change. With international cooperations, we don't have the possibility to sit in the same table and have face-to-face exchanges. Of course, working with philanthropists require more proactive attitude of the think tank, especially if there is not a culture of philanthropy in place in our country. So it is an incentive for the think tank to approach proactively the different funding opportunities. There is typically a different academic level within between local philanthropists and international experts or people working at international organizations. And also sometimes you need to shift from a research approach to an implementation approach, because this is more demanded than research services. And I think I will try to close with some strategies and ideas on how to start. So typically, if your organization do not have experience in working with local philanthropists, a good strategy is to start with contacts by the executive director and the board, organizing bilateral meetings in which these people can tell the philanthropists and the different companies about the think tank's work, the think tank's objectives, the way in which they can collaborate, trying to understand their motivation, etc. Of course, if your think tank has fundraising responsible, it is a very attractive opportunity to bring him or her in and understand the motivations of the donor, and then put the hands on the proposal, on other mechanisms to engage them. You can also build a network of contact, that is, approach one philanthropist and ask him to recommend 2 or 3 colleagues that he or she thinks will have the desire to contribute to the think tank. That's an important way of creating a network of contacts. Of course, identify donors of other organizations, and there is the final point I would like to highlight is that it is important when dealing with people and philanthropists to incentivize their loyalty. So one strategy is to build boards like private sector committees that Group of Art in Ecuador has, also CPEC in Argentina, to manage communication strategically and share update information, and also dedicate some staff to follow up on these people. Of course, this entails a lot of work. For that reason, it would be important if your organization scheme allows to allocate one person to this function, on ideally a team. Another strategies, there's annual fundraising events are a very important, are a very interesting strategy to bring in philanthropists, to show them your work, to create a space in, where they can relate to other stakeholders like policymakers, journalists, also donors. Also, another interesting strategy is to create project consortiums. That is, the organization can create research pools based on strategic issues for donors. This is important, and it will help you mitigate a single influence on a project. So the idea here is that instead of one company or supporting one specific project, you can create a research pool that is, okay, we will work on transport research. We will research on transport, for instance. So what are the companies interested in supporting new innovative research and new research in this specific policy issue? And they just contribute with money and budget for different set of activities that you conduct under this research pool, not just specific project. And in that way, if you can bring different companies to support an issue, this will help you mitigate a single influence in your work. As I said, private sector committees are an important strategy to engage them. Also, you can start with some small projects and test how it works and what are the benefits and the costs for the think tank. Sorry for going a little bit fast. I will go directly this slide. It is important to consider different or multiple entry points for these philanthropies. Sometimes the relationship can start by inviting them to participate in an annual dinner or an annual annual event, and then by following up, you start engaging them more and more, and this person can become an institutional sponsor, and at the end follow a project consortium with other companies or other philanthropies. Thinking about a CEO, you can invite him to attend or her to attend a discussion breakfast. Then he becomes he becomes motivated about understanding more about the organization and follow another event and then follow a project consortium. So you can consider different entry points to engage these philanthropists. Our idea was to tap into the fundraising event as a very important and demanded opportunity to work with, to engage philanthropists, but unfortunately we don't have the time, so I can tap into this in the forum. Let me just close on local philanthropy with this chart. So when you work with different funding sources, it might help you to understand what is the balance among these, the impact of these different sources in the budget of your organization. Some organizations have policies in terms of the maximum amount of the budget that the organization can represent. So, for instance, the organization that Vanessa and I used to work, it has a policy that says, okay, no organizations can go over the 25% of the budget. And this is a very interesting policy because it helps you balance the impact of single source, and it's important from the side of sustainability, that it's the core of your funding model. Because if you put all the eggs in one source, then you might face some challenges in the mid and long term. So, apologize for going through all these ideas quickly. Let me ask you if you have concrete questions. Let's analyze the viability of going through them now. Otherwise, we can continue in the forum. Okay, this is interesting. I wasn't able to go through this. Among the new strategies, we wanted to present or just mention the crowdfunding campaigns. Let's see if Vanessa can also help us here. But I do not know any think tank what it is, but I do know civil society organizations that work with this modality. They launch very short and concrete campaigns to reach a very, I would say, affordable amount of money. Chequeado, there is a fact-check organization in Argentina, is one of them. We can share a summary of their experience in the forum. Vanessa here says that there are successful crowdfunding experiences from, I guess, individual researchers or a group of researchers. It's a challenge. I think that if you guys know about these experiences, it would be great to know them. Any other questions, comment about the things we saw? Of course, we will share the presentation, and you will have the possibility to go through the different slides, and hopefully they will trigger some further reflections from your side and of course with your colleagues at your organizations. So, if you don't have more questions, and considering that it's now 2 hours since we start, I would like to close this webinar, but let me give you a final opportunity to jump with some questions. The first exchange after Vanesa's presentation was very interesting, so okay, thanks Pablo. I'm glad, we are glad that this is helpful for you. Of course, this is the idea is to trigger some reflections and contribute to further actions. Okay, Sarah, don't worry, we are just closing and talking about the next steps, but we will also share them in the forum. So, what about how we continue after the webinar? So, you will have to, you know that you will have to submit a personal task. It has to do with exploring your lean approach. We will explain this further. We will share a sheet with the concrete instruction, and it's the difficulty or the level of complexity that you put you can put into this exercise, it really depends on you. You just need to consider that June 7th is the deadline. You should submit your exercise in the forum by that date. Continue sharing thoughts and concerns in the platform, especially linked to what we have addressed today. We will also share an evaluation form for you to fill. We will do this after you complete your personal task. It is a very important component of our work because it's the time in which we receive feedback and we get interesting inputs to improve our work. And finally, for those participants who submit their personal tasks, we will share certificates of participation. Let me clarify that once you submit your personal task, Vanessa and I will review them and send back some feedback about your personal tasks, always trying to help you to trigger new reflections and visualize other potential actions of your work regarding funding models. So these are the next steps. Do you have any question regarding this, how we will continue? Otherwise, I think we can close. Let me also say that the personal task is an important component of this course because it's the moment and it's the opportunity for you to put and show share what you think about all these topics that we have addressed during the course. It's an opportunity for you to put the concepts in play and bring them to your organization. And this is the main objective of the course, to discuss, to put the different topics that we saw in dialogue with your own experience and your organization's needs and objectives. Okay, let's see if Pablo has questions. Otherwise, let me say goodbye. Also, on behalf of Vanessa, that was facing some problems with the audio. Great. So goodbye, everyone. We will share the record afterwards with the presentation, and let's continue with the discussion and the next steps in the forum. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining and for staying all the webinar. Thanks, Laura, for your effort. I know it's late, so good night.